Hello, and welcome to another episode of my Coffee Break Art. Snippets about art to watch in your coffee break. We all know the Kitchener advert and the phrase, "Your country needs you." These are retained in our memory like ghosts. They're echoes of the First World War, and they came from a world that was a very different place to the one we occupy today. But they are words still remembered, and the image is still repeated. A sign for staff in a shop in a London street, a village notice board in Suffolk, or a village fete, the advertising for a Sky sitcom based around 3 recruitment dodgers in World War I. I can tell you one thing for certain. If you met Kitchener in 1914, you wouldn't have recognised him from that image on the poster. Here he is in 1914, here walking down the steps of the War Office, and here, talking to another officer, pretty tall bloke as you can see. Here's a cartoon of him, which shows his height. Here he is on an official portrait over 10 years before. Known as an aloof character, and not one to make friends, it has been suggested that he preferred the company of men, but I've personally met his family, who told me of a time in his younger days when he was courting one of the aunts. This is the last photograph of Kitchener, taken in 1916 on the SS Hampshire, just before it was blown up. He was just one of hundreds of men who perished that night. The government at the start of the 1914-18 war produced thousands and thousands of recruiting posters, mainly with text only, as shown in this composition. However, the poster we're talking about was not printed by them, but privately, by the magazine The London Opinion. They wanted to use Kitchener's face and asked one of their illustrators, a commercial artist called Advert-Free. However, Kitchener's appearance in 1914 was perhaps not the most inspiring, so to get one that they felt was suitable, they had to trawl through the National Portrait Gallery for a publicity picture that he had taken nearly 30 years before, when he was 35. Advert-Free turned this into this imposing drawing, changing not only his moustache, but his diverging eyes, which people had said gave the impression that Kitchener was never really looking at them. The recruiting advert was eventually printed on the cover of the magazine on the 5th of September 1914, and was followed by a picture again used on the 14th of November. The London Opinion then printed about 10,000 copies in the form of posters, and these were distributed across the country. We have found photos of them in places as far afield as on a bus in Dublin, on a wall in Chester, and on a railway station in Lancashire. Having said that, compared to the official government posters, there were actually very few around. Interestingly, at the time the government pinched the image and put it on one of their own posters. The US seems to have seen the image and used it in their Uncle Sam advertising. In fact, it became better known in the US than England at the time. Copies of the same idea were used by other European countries, not always allies. After the war, all the leftover government posters, and there were thousands of them, were given to schools and post offices, and that's why they're so plentiful now and in such good condition. The London Opinion posters must have all ended up pasted on walls, as today only 3 or 4 are around. The last one changed hands in 2014 for £30,000. For many years after the war, The poster was unheard of, but for some reason, in 1940, the magazine Post decided to use the picture on its cover. In 1949, George Orwell published a book called 1984, which was made into a film which was actually released in 1984. The film showed some very similar shots to our Kitchener poster. The advert was occasionally referred to in the press from 1965, including a ridicule of Harold Macmillan on the 14th of July 61 by the Daily Mail. However, it was only in the 1960s when Carnaby Street fashion adopted the military style of dress and a shop called I Was Kitchener's Valet was popular. At that time, the image of Kitchener pointing his finger became part of the establishment. And since then, every scout group, every community centre, every church hall has used it to advertise their coming events. The icon was born. Leake has always been credited with inventing the design of using a pointed finger, but at the time he would have seen other examples used on a great many other posters around London. Here are some examples. And it goes back well into use in classical art. Antonello's de Massini's Blessing Christ, which was painted about 1465. Here's Portormo's Nude Study, painted in 1525. And of course, a detail from the Sistine Chapel, Creation of the Sun and Moon, by Michelangelo in 1508-12. I leave you with a random selection of images on the theme. A man who looked nothing like Kitchener and who was forgotten until the 1960s, but has become an icon of the First World War. And thank you for watching this Coffee Break Art. I hope you enjoyed it. You can help me to get more views by clicking on the subscribe button, and I would appreciate this. Don't hesitate to add a comment below, and I'll see you next time.